Thanks everyone for coming along tonight from your living room or your car or wherever you are, anywhere around the country.
We had two separate full court judgments finding in favour of our proposition that there's no such thing as a permanent casual, and that when you look at defining an employee as to whether they're a permanent or a casual employee, you look at the reality of the employment relationship, not merely the label or designation placed on it by an employer. The LNP, with the support of One Nation and Sterling Griff from South Australia, managed to move legislation through the Senate, which basically undid the Skeen and Rosado cases, the WorkPac cases. So the position in February of this year was that workers had the benefit of these two full court judgments, and the legislation which was passed by the Senate this year directly overturns that very basic principle, and basically says that if a employer gives you a contract which describes you as a casual, you can't look any further. In fact, the courts are prevented from looking any further.
In your industry in particular, the principle of same job, same pay can only be fixed now by legislation as a result of the coalition, Scott Morrison, Barnaby Joyce these days now, all of them voting for this legislation to overturn a fair legal decision. It's not even as if they were passive about it. They actually had to intervene to overturn this decision, and in a range of areas where we couldn't knock it off in the Senate because One Nation and the former Centre Alliance people in South Australia, they all went bad on the ledge. Therefore, we were confronted with those legal decisions that the union had won on behalf of Skeen and the Rosado case, being in a position whereby in future that can't be enforced. Well, if you can wind back workers' rights and conditions through legislation, you can actually wind them forward as well. And that is what I've committed to do. I've committed to do it immediately upon we come to government, because common sense tells you the fairness that's required in the workplace. And I have found, as I've gone around the country speaking to various forums and town halls, when I speak about same job, same pay as the principle, you get universal support for it.
Albo, I guess my question is, over the mining companies have huge legal teams, and the best money lawyers can buy. And I hold the view that if this legislation is enacted, they will do whatever they can to circumvent it, to find loopholes. Have you considered that? And if you have, how do you intend to deal with it?
Mate, we will make sure that we are pretty good lawyers too in the Commonwealth government, and we'll make sure that the legislation is tight. The other thing that the power of government does to make a difference is to really bounce some of these companies to use the power of government. And the LNP, walk around, tell all these companies, good on you for driving down the wages and conditions. It's a very different thing if you have a government that's committed to fairness. And we would be doing that, but we wouldn't be relying upon goodwill. We'd be relying upon legislation and enforcement, making sure that it's enforced.
Yeah, just with the same job, same pay, in regards to that, how are you going to implement that? Is that just going to be changed through legislation and stuff, Anthony, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Through legislation that then could be enforced through the Fair Work Commission. So you would have an enforcement. We'd talk as well about enforcement provisions and indeed penalties. One of the ways I think that you could do, we'll work through the legislation, the specifics, but it seems to me that you also want to have some penalties for any attempt to subvert the legislation is a pretty good idea, I think, as well. But we would work that through. We'd work through it with the union.
Just in my opinion, I've been labour hire for 7 years now, and in regards to the same pay, same job, same pay. So obviously that's got to be implemented through legislation, but is there to enforce, like basically like say, you know, someone that does the same job or something for 12 months to go permanent with the minor operator? Because I know, like you're saying before, there's loopholes there where you do the same job, same pay. There's still not going to be. This is my opinion. There's still going to be a loophole there where you'll have that in casual employment. Anthony?
Yeah, well, this is just one element of our secure work policy. There are many others. For example, changing the objects of the Act so that secure work is an objective of the Act. At the moment, it's not. So there are various objectives about efficiency in the economy. There's nothing there about security of work. So changing the object of the Act would flow through when any court looked at what's the intent. The other thing that isn't there is there's no proper definition of casuals in the Act. So we'd also make sure that that happens.
Given where if you're a BHP employee at the moment and a WorkPac employee, you've seen the use of the stalling tactic by these huge companies. Can Albo or yourself, Murray, talk about what particular facets you can do in order to strengthen a bargaining arm for a collective?
Yeah, look, well, there's a few things you can do. One of the things you can do in terms of the Fair Work Commission, of course, has been stacked. So you've got, the most absurd is the appointment of Sophie Mirabella recently, a former Liberal MP who lost a seat and who was a very divisive character. You can also, in terms of making sure that there's proper resources so that, one, you get legislation carried quickly to change the nature of the system to provide for secure work, but also to look at the way that enterprise bargaining is working so that there's an incentive for agreement making, as opposed to at the moment, there's an incentive in the system for companies essentially to hold out, to not come to the table with unions. A whole way that the IR system is working is not leading to an increase in wages, which is what we need to do.
Just read out the question. The casualisation of jobs in this industry is causing a lot of stress and uncertainty around job security. This is leading to depression, which has led to a lot of workers committing suicide. Do you agree? And what can we do about that?
Yeah, look, thanks for the question, although it's unfortunate that it's got to be asked. There's Hobos.
There we go. We got you there now.
Mate, how are you doing? Look, it's one of the things we've really got to address. Look, if you haven't got security of employment, how do you get a mortgage for your home? How do you and your partner make a decision about having your first child or having an additional child? How do you make a decision about whether you can afford school fees and what school your kids might go to? All of those things in life are dependent upon the security of your employment. You can't go to the bank and say, oh, look, I reckon I might be okay. I'm a casual employee. My work patterns are uncertain, my hours are uncertain, and my wages change over a period of time, but give me a loan. It doesn't work that way. And look, it is really adding to so much insecurity in society. And as you say, tragically, the suicide rate particularly amongst men of a certain age, above the age of 40, they're in a casual job or they're in insecure work, they feel as though they can't provide for their family to the extent that they want to. It can be really, really tough.
So we've spoken about how same job, same pay might apply to our labour hire workers across the industry. I suppose I just wanted to clarify how wide you'd see the policy sort of applying. So using BHP as the example, they've introduced the 2 shelf companies under the guise of, given permanent jobs, and those workers get all the entitlements of paid leave and everything like that, but they're still, 20, 30, 40 grand, less compared to the likes of Simon or Robbo. So would you see that the policy applies to those guys and girls as well?
Mate, absolutely. And you could structure legislation so that it looked explicitly outlawed the use of essentially front companies. Corporate tricks is what that is. And what you could do is make sure there was a provision in the legislation that companies couldn't avoid their obligations under the Act, because you wouldn't want to create legislation that then encouraged the use of, be they phantom companies or, subsidiaries, subcontracting, all of that. Like the only way that you address this is by saying principles there across the board, same job, same pay. And sometimes it might just need, from my experience with some sometimes the best legislation is actually shorter rather than longer. So it's all encompassing. So you say, this is the principle, and in interpreting the Act, it will be taken into account the intent of the legislation. So that's why things like objects, when I spoke about the Fair Work Commission and having secure work as an object of the Act, it's a way in which, by having objects of the Act, is what courts will look at for what the intent is. So you would need to make sure that the intent's clear, and certainly my intention, and I know that the intention of the union would be that it's done in a way that is unavoidable. So no manipulation, no tricks, applies across the board.